Poets have described it as a long strip of land that looks like a face, whose smile is shaped by a river's estuary. This land is Portugal, a highly and continuously coveted territory at the far western tip of continental Europe. A country of conquests and reconquests, it is also from here that the world's most famous explorers set out and returned. While visitors may experience the remarkable cultural and religious legacy of Portugal's tumultuous history, they will also be fascinated by its amazing natural diversity. With its cities, landscapes, and moods, Portugal is a land of contrasts, of warmth, of smiles, which the traveller will discover with joy to the melancholic sound of the fado. The Tagus, one of Europe's largest rivers, flows through Lisbon and empties into the Atlantic Ocean. It is probably no coincidence that the capital was built around its estuary. The Portuguese, a nation of seafarers and conquerors, were very early on aware of far-off lands to be explored. By following the Rua Augusta, the visitor enters the heart of the city, the Baixa district, also called Lower Town. This delicately paved pedestrian street was built after the devastating earthquake of 1755. Near the amazing Elevador de Santa Justa, evidence of the tragedy is still visible on the ruins of this convent. However, the catastrophe also allowed to develop a new architectural momentum within the city that was more rectilinear and functional. Number 28 isn't just a tram, it is a myth. For almost a century now, this tireless climber has crisscrossed the narrow streets of the Alfama district prior to continuing its way through the capital. The only compromise towards modernity is the automatic ticket puncture. The first stop is the cathedral, built on the site of a former mosque. With its special architecture, it was a place of worship, as well as a defense base against the numerous invaders who attacked Lisbon. From the Mirador Portos do Sol, the São Vicente Monastery dominates Alfama, the city's oldest district, whose cobblestones still resonate with the steps of the Romans going to the theatre, followed by those of the Moors on their way to the steam baths, and later those of the Crusaders. Portuguese cities owe their gentle nostalgia in great part to the azulejos, the ceramic tiles in shades of blue that decorate the walls of churches and palaces. This district is undergoing major renovations. This could almost be the heart of a Medina, in its labyrinth of narrow streets and endless charm. It is difficult to imagine that we are crisscrossing a major European capital. The next stop is the Taverna del Rei, a mecca for the fado. People come here to enjoy dinner to the sound of these melancholic songs. The name of this music that has survived for centuries without losing its intensity has its origin in the tragic destiny that seamen and prostitutes used to sing about in the harbour of Lisbon. In the early 90s, it became popular again and has been seducing a new public of enthusiasts ever since.
The fado tradition is very strong in Lisbon. I've lived in the Alfama district for 37 years. When I moved here, there were only 2 places where fado was performed, and now there are more than 15 of them.
The São Jorge Castle is more commonly known as the Castle of the Moors. Perched on Lisbon's highest hill, it offers one of the most beautiful views of the city and the estuary, and a privileged access to the city's other districts. A different atmosphere pervades in the Largo Trinidad Coelho, a small district that was recently renovated. It will progressively become a pedestrian zone, except for the passage of the tram. Atop one of Lisbon's hills, the Miradouro de São Pedro de Alcântara overlooks the Beiro Alto, yet another historical district with cobblestone streets and flaking facades. Under the 100-year-old trees, people stroll or play cards around the pavilions in this oasis of peace that pretends to ignore the commotion of the capital. The number 28 tram continues its route through the Bairro Alto towards the Café Brasileira, a true institution since 1908. Inside and outside, lively discussions take place under the attentive gaze of the statue of Pessoa.
Yes, each year you have to pay.
Behind the smiles, faces of African, Brazilian and other foreign origins still call to mind the exploration fever of the Portuguese people. In Lisbon, one should not mistake the tram for the elevador. This funicular counterpart was recently redecorated by a team of artists called Art in Movement. The frescoes of mirrors that now cover its sides illustrate the encounters along its route. The 25th of April bridge built over the Tagus in 1966 leads to the Cristo Rei, the smaller version of Corcovado of Rio de Janeiro. Since 1515, the Tower of Belém seems to defy the invader arriving from the ocean. This checkerboard-like tower built by Francisco de Arruda sat at first in the middle of the river, but it had to be moved after the tsunami that followed the 1775 earthquake. In Lisbon, certain reputations transcend centuries without any compromise, such as the pastiche of the Belém pastry shop. Their success has remained unchanged since 1837. To this day, people come from across town to savour with joy these small custard cream tarts on a puff pastry generously sprinkled with cinnamon and powdered sugar. The Hieronymites Monastery commemorates the 1498 Vasco da Gama expedition to India and all the sailors who contributed to the greatness of the country. More recently, the World Exhibition of 1998 modified the appearance of the capital with the emergence in the nation's park of contemporary architecture, of which the Knowledge Pavilion, the Oceanarium or the Orient Station are perfect examples. Inaugurated 500 years after the discovery of the sea route to India, the new Vasco da Gama Bridge is a 17-kilometre-long reminder of the greatness of the Portuguese nation. To escape the stifling heat of the capital during the summer, the first monarchs of Lisbon quickly understood that all they had to do was move to Sintra, a few kilometres to the west on the Atlantic coast. Sintra, known as a vacation resort of the powerful, will amaze the visitor with the romantic architecture of its residences, surrounded by lush vegetation. Here, the difference in temperature with Lisbon can exceed 10 degrees Celsius during the summer. Overlooking the entire region, the walls that surrounded the summer palaces of the kings of Portugal hide treasures for archaeologists.
Estamos a encontrar vestígios do Neolítico.
Here you find vestiges of the Neolithic times that are over 7,000 years old,
Medieval cristão.
but also vestiges of a Christian medieval cemetery from the 11th to 14th century, as well as Moorish and Christian vestiges.
Mouros e cristãos.
The Pina National Palace is the most visited monument in Portugal. Ferdinand of Saxe-Coburg, the husband of Queen Maria II, hired a Prussian architect to build this fanciful Bavarian Manueline castle that includes Moorish-style doors and crenulated towers in hues of lemon and pink. The 16th century cloister of the convent was restored by King Ferdinand II. The fountain in the middle of the courtyard and exceptional mosaics inspired by Spanish and Arab influences lend the feeling of a riad to the place. During the summer, King Carlos I and Queen Amélie of Orléans welcomed their close friends in these Moorish reception rooms. The Sintra Palace is also astonishing. Built by the Moors, it was enlarged by King Dinis I at the end of the 13th century. As in the past, the sumptuous Swan Room is used for official banquets. The more recent Grotto of the Baths displays on its ceiling delightfully flirtatious scenes painted by Giovannini Grossi. As for the Coats of Arms room, it has not lost any of its splendour with its coffered domed ceiling from the 15th century and the coats of arms of 72 noble families. The table of a king must reflect his power and celebrate abundance and good food. Heading towards the extremity of this small peninsula, we reach Cabo da Roca, the westernmost point of mainland Europe, swept by the winds. The beaches of Portugal generally offer excellent conditions for surfing, windsurfing and kite surfing. With its great waves and strong winds, the beach of Guincho is a reference for any windsurfing enthusiast. Ericeira, however, is a well-known surf spot, although it remains first and foremost a fishing village. Its houses, decorated with blue ceramics, are a charming refuge for the residents of Lisbon on the weekends. It is here that the region of Extremadura begins, a kind of southern extremity of Europe, with the richest arable lands of Portugal, but also the most westerly. The gradual silting up of the Orelu River pushed the coastline back to more than 10 kilometers from the walls of Óbidos, so it is hard to imagine this village once watched over the sea traffic. One day in 1228, a dazzled Queen Isabel discovered this fortress built by the Romans, then magnificently transformed into a city by the Moors. King Dinis then decided to offer the city to her as a wedding present. An impressive fortified wall protects this haven of peace that was magnificently restored exactly as it was after the 1755 earthquake. The city has remained so well preserved that it has applied to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Resembling an open-air museum, the walls of these streets are covered with azulejos that fill the eye with wonder. They tell the story of the country, such as the wedding in August 1541 of King Afonso V, who was only 10 years old. More than 3,000 people still live in this privileged setting that was declared a national monument in 1951. In Portugal, the Pusadas are old monasteries or convents converted into hotels. The one in Óbidos was the first of its kind. There are only 6 rooms, but they all have a unique view of the village and its surroundings. In the kitchen, they are preparing the speciality of the area, the famous polvo al guerrero, grilled octopus cooked with potatoes and peppers. Cod and sardines may be the traditional ingredients of Portuguese cuisine, yet octopus and seafood are also highly appreciated and often served on the tables along the coast. Prepared with only a little olive oil, this extremely simple rustic dish was a favourite of the cellar masters of the Algarve region's wineries. The 12th century marks the beginning of the Reconquista or reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula from the Muslims, a period during which the great Christian religious orders consolidated their power. The capture of Santarém is at the origin of the foundation of the Alcobaça Monastery, a building that symbolizes the Cistercian style. History also retains that Alcobaça sheltered the tragic love of King Pedro I and Inés de Castro before she was murdered in Coimbra in 1355. The Cloister of Silence evokes one of the first requirements of the Cistercian order, the vow of silence. Although other halls and rooms were added later on, it was the largest cloister ever built by this order during the reign of King Dinis I. Our journey continues towards the coast facing the Atlantic Ocean. Here in Nazaré, traditional boats used to be pulled ashore by oxen. Today, on these beaches, the Lisboans highly appreciate the famous beach tents as soon as the weather permits. The condition of women greatly improved in 1975 when they were granted the right to vote, yet the older women still highly respect tradition, as shown by the way they dress. By heading inland to Batalha, the Santa Maria de Vitoria monastery that looks like a cathedral is the symbol of the birth of the Kingdom of Portugal in 1385. It is here that Don Alvarez Pereira, with an army of only 7,000 men, crushed the Castilian army and its 30,000 soldiers. The construction of this flamboyant-style building lasted more than a century and was never totally completed. From the English churches to the Manueline style of its cloister, the minute details of this masterpiece of architecture recount the influences that inspired its architects. However, it is the interior of the monastery that reveals its magic. King John I and his English wife Philippa of Lancaster were laid to rest here. In Tomar, the fortified convent spreads over several hectares. This city within the city was built by monk soldiers, along with the Order of the Temple Castle, that displays a wonderful synthesis of the architecture of several eras. The amazing opulence of the ornaments suggests that the Order of the Temple, followed by the Military Order of Christ, owned fabulous financial means. Without omitting the holy purpose of these buildings, their exuberant style is commensurate with the expeditions ordered by Henry the Navigator towards the New World. Further north, on the right bank of the Mondego River, Coimbra was the first capital of the kingdom. Overlooking the city, its plurisecular university is one of the oldest in the world. It was a major centre of resistance during the dictatorship. The magic of the place is no doubt due to the beautiful 17th century azulejos of the São Miguel Chapel, as well as the paintings of cherubs and the Chinese-esque ornaments of its sumptuous organ case. The Biblioteca Joanina, built during the Baroque period in a room of the royal palace, is just as magnificent. Here, everything was done to preserve the 200,000 books of this library that in the past held up to 1 million volumes. The walls are 2.11 meters thick and the massive doors are made of teak, thus offering this showcase constant temperature conditions, in addition to having an air-conditioned room that holds the most precious volumes. Coimbra is constantly juggling with the centuries through a superimposition of eras, such as the 16th century facade of the Santa Cruz Monastery, and the even more remarkable cafe that found refuge in the sacristy, a historic place. Approximately 15 kilometers southwest of Coimbra, the ruins of Portugal's largest Roman site are to be found in the antique city of Coimbriga. The Romans started settling here in the 1st century, yet it was estimated that the first occupants go back to the Bronze Age, thus 10 centuries earlier. The site displays exceptional representational mosaics that were only recently discovered. Heading further east inland, a granite ridge approximately 60 kilometers long suddenly appears. It is the Serra da Estrela, the only mountain chain of continental Portugal protected today by a natural park. During the summer, it is the territory of shepherds and their herds of goats and sheep. It is also here that the recipe of the Serra da Estrela, a famous and highly appreciated cheese, is jealously passed on.
Many people still make that cheese here. There's good cheese, but also crooks who imitate it. We have to beware of imitations. It's not the same thing.
The granitic valleys, such as that of the Zezeru, lead us to other breathtaking landscapes. Here, at a higher altitude, in Peñas Doradas, houses are embedded in the blocks of granite. A mineral landscape in the summer, it is covered with snow during the winter, even offering several small ski resort areas to enthusiasts. Back on the Atlantic coast in the northern part of the country, Évora was in the 15th century a harbour famous for its salt marshes and boats that left to fish cod near Newfoundland. But one day, a terrible storm decided otherwise. It lifted a wall of sand that blocked all access to the sea and forced Évora to rebuild around the lagoon. These impressive boats with a flat bottom, a curved swan neck bow covered with naive paintings, are called Morissarouche. With their square sails, they used to crisscross the lagoon to transport salt and people. But originally, they were mainly used to collect the morissoche, seaweeds used in agriculture for fertilizing purposes that were collected by using long wooden rakes. But the economic activity of the lagoon has sharply decreased. It has been replaced by the tourists in this city, known as the Venice of Portugal. Downtown, one has preserved the spirit of the previous century when Évora flourished economically. Numerous flea markets invite the visitor to revisit these joyful souvenirs. Leaving the city and heading to the beaches, it is the old-fashioned charm of Costa Nova that startles the visitor, with multicolored beach houses that have become the symbol of these northern beaches. Near Praia de Barra, or the beaches of São Jacinto, the coast is protected by a natural reserve that begins in a centuries-old forest inland and ends with the dunes. The Ponte de Maria bridge, built by the Frenchman Gustave Eiffel, announces the entrance to Porto, the last major city in the north that gave its name to the country and was a long-time rival of Lisbon. In the centre of the city, the corbelled houses make up one of the rare vestiges of the old Porto, recognised by UNESCO in 1996. Around the Bolaio market, the facades have not changed for a century, and the clients are still numerous at the Aperla, the mythical delicatessen. On the market, one continues to hawk the sardines caught that morning.
Quanto é que é dele?
Heading north towards the Douro Valley, the traveller arrives in the heart of the country's vineyards that produce the famous Porto. The barrels are still transported to the city by boat or train. The famous vineyards that spread in terraces above the river once brought fortunes to English merchants who made the famous liquor with this wine. The English may have created the trading houses in the 17th century, but it is during the 2nd century that the Romans planted the first vineyards, taken over much later by French monks. This is the Quinta do Panascal in Porto Fonseca. an estate created in 1822 that revived the tradition of this wine of ocean-going navigators, as it could be perfectly preserved in the holds.
A good Porto wine depends on the weather. It needs extremes. A very cold winter and a hot summer so the grapes can reach maturity. In the summer, for example, it is very hot here. Temperatures can reach 40 or 45 degrees Celsius. And this raises the sugar level in the grapes.
Further inland north of Porto, in the Minho region, Guimarães claims to be the birthplace of Portugal, as it is from this city that King Afonso Henriques, who was born here in 1110, launched the reconquest of the country from the Moors. It is one of the oldest cities of the country. The Palace of the Dukes, partially built by French architects, remained the official residence of President Salazar in the last century. A historical rival of Guimarães, today Braga is the third largest city of Portugal. Here the visitor will be captivated by the impressive number of churches and other religious buildings, a legacy of its ancient history and a deep-rooted tradition of worship. The last stop before the northern limit of the country is Camina. This old fortress town used to control the estuary of the Minho and defended the northern border of the country against the unrelenting ambition of the Galicians. The stakes are no longer the same, and Camina is today a small and peaceful fishing town. The Minho River that flows through the city also marks over 76 kilometers the physical border separating Portugal from its Hispanic neighbor. The valley it irrigates is an astonishing agricultural reserve for the country. Here the visitor suddenly has the feeling of having jumped in space to land in the middle of the Brittany countryside in France. It isn't so, but the granite and the stones of the houses could lead to this confusion. The river meets the Atlantic Ocean between Pontevedra and the city of Minho. There the estuary opens onto quiet beaches where the mild weather and soft lights are particularly enjoyable at the end of the fall, even though the temperature of the water isn't very engaging for a swim. Here the winds push the cold currents flowing along the septentrional coasts of Portugal. As for the Gulf Stream that bounces off the northern coast of the Basque Country, it spares this coastline its warmth. Yet in the summer, this inconvenience becomes a true advantage. At the beginning of the warm season, contrary to the beaches in the south, these have the advantage of remaining quiet all year. A change in setting and atmosphere in the center of the country as we head to Évora, in the heart of the Alentejo area. Évora is to some extent a historical island set in the arid and deserted plains of the region. The sinuous layout of the old part of the town is proof of its medieval past, although it reached its glory in the 16th century. The Diana Temple confirms this city was founded in Roman times. This 2nd century monument is probably the best preserved Roman monument in the Iberian Peninsula, no doubt because Évora was used as a fortress in the Middle Ages. The Palace of the Dukes of Cadaval only reveals its wealth once inside, also displaying some of the most beautiful azulejos of Portugal. After being occupied by the Moors in the 12th century, the 14th century marked the beginning of its golden age. Évora became the residence of the Avis dynasty and a major centre for intellectuals and artists until the Spanish occupation, followed by the invasion of Napoleon's troops, who pillaged the city and put an end to its glorious destiny. The cathedral devoted to the Virgin Mary is Portugal's largest medieval church. It is also a building where the sacred blended with the imperatives of war, as shown by its fortified walls. The austerity of the walls contrasts sharply with the opulence of the marble. Yet the megaliths of the Almendres remind us that Évora's roots reach further back than Roman times. These rocks, set out in horseshoe form, probably used for astronomy purposes, are 7,000 years old and are the oldest of the entire Iberian Peninsula. Further east in the Alentejo, the village of Arelos seems to sleep in the summer as if wrapped up in the heat's torpor. This village has become famous for its traditional rugs, such as that of Elizabeth. Entirely made by hand, these rare and precious pieces are ordered from faraway places, and each one requires several months of exacting work. This craft appeared during the 12th century, and despite the competition of imported and factory-made products, it is said to still feed half the village today. But in Arelos, during the summer, there is one art that surpasses all others, that of the famous siesta. As we head further east in the plains of Alentejo, vegetation is more scarce, and so is the population. Montcharge, one of the last villages before the Spanish border, was founded in the 8th century with the arrival of the Moors, prior to be given to the order of the Templars in gratitude for its help during the Reconquest. Just like other villages in the region, the population of Montcharge is decreasing, and mostly old people still live here. The reservoir of the huge Alceva Dam is the largest artificial lake of Europe. It was built in an attempt to save Alentejo from droughts. The landscape alternates between olive trees and green oaks, whose bark is carefully cut to extract the cork. On the trunks, the number of years one has to wait for the next stripping is written down. Harvesting takes place every 9 years from May to June. It is used as bottle stoppers, of course, but also for insulation.
We wet the cork to strip it, and then it is with this envelope that we do everything.
Let us leave the stifling heat for the freshness of the west and the national park of Alentejo, to which Villanova de Milfontes marks the entrance. Stuck between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mira River, the setting used to be strategic, as it allowed to control access to the river and to hide boats there. The coast seems to be sculpted by the cliffs, but a little further on, long sandy beaches and crystal clear waters hide behind the dunes. The dunes henceforth also belong to the country's heritage and boast a rare biodiversity that one did not pay much attention to until recently. To discover this kind of unique wild beach, one must follow the canyons whose form dents the mountain. This effort is rewarded by the discovery of these magical and unimaginable places. Further south, the Portuguese parish of Alfama spreads at the foot of the Alentejo Natural Park, the most important protected maritime zone in the country. Cap Saint Vicente appears on the horizon, and further north, these black cliffs and reefs allow us to imagine how fierce storms can be here. In terms of surfing, the beaches of the Algarve are just as great as their sisters in the north. The swell here is very steady and attracts numerous enthusiasts from all over Europe. At the tip of the Algarve coast, Cap Saint Vicente is the southwesternmost point in Portugal. It is here that Henry the Navigator had a fortress built and opened the School of Sagres, the famous navigation centre that crystallized the domination dreams of the oceans by a small yet tremendously ambitious country. By reaching Lagos, we have arrived in the southern part of the country called the Algarve, set in the mouth of the Ben Sapharim River. This city was first visited by the Phoenicians and the Greeks prior to the arrival of the Romans. It is from this town that Henry the Navigator launched his expeditions, which are the object of a real cult here. Between the commercial activities in the city and the navigation school in Sagres, it is on caravels that man left to discover the African coasts. Despite the hordes of tourists, it is pleasant to stroll in the entirely pedestrian old part of the city, in the shade of the fortifications, built by the Moors, that separate it from the modern part. Today it is hard to imagine that several shops in the centre used to be held by slave traders. As an indication of the proportion of this sad commerce, during the 16th century, more than 10% of Lisbon's population was made up of slaves. Lagos was the residence of the Algarve governors, and enjoyed a golden period until the terrible earthquake of 1755 that destroyed most of the buildings. The Algarve can also be appreciated in the soft hues of the rising sun on the small beach of Dona Ana, hidden among the cliffs. Faro is the major city on Portugal's southern coast. The capital of the Algarve has known a prestigious past. The Arabs used it as a crossroads of the Iberian Peninsula, and the Harran chose it as the capital of their principality. As many Algarve villages, Faro experienced several destructive earthquakes. Prior to becoming a highly appreciated destination for tourists wishing to reach the beaches of the Algarve, Faro had developed an important fishing industry. For those who won't hesitate to continue their journey to the east towards Spain, the urban pressure progressively disappears before reaching the Ria Formosa Natural Park, with a lagoon that is just as beautiful as those of the South Seas. Created in 1987, the park expresses, over more than 50 kilometers of coastline, the unyielding will to protect this exceptional ecosystem from the real estate fever. These key humid zones are major nesting areas and home to numerous species. The Algarve has always been a land of agricultural tradition, but with time many quintas or farms have been closed or abandoned. Yet some of them have undergone major transformations, such as the Dalua Quinta that is now a hotel.
It's an agricultural zone here, and it is protected. We have orange trees, olive trees, carobs, and almond trees.
Our last stop before the border with southern Spain is in Tavira. For a long time it was the most populated city of the Algarve and remains the most Mediterranean of Portuguese cities with its numerous churches and exceptional dwellings. The fishing and trading activities within the Mediterranean area nourished this influence for a long time and gave the city its power under Roman domination starting in the 1st century. Every morning, Tavira wakes up to the sound of its fishing boats that come and go along the wharfs of the Rio Guialong to bring fish to the village's cooperative. The city almost lost all of its sea activity following the silting up of the river and several earthquakes. The 19th century brought renewed success with tuna fishing and the canning industry. Yet today, it is mainly moderate tourism that guarantees its revenue. As a result of the drop in its fishing-related revenues along the coasts, Portugal reduced its flotilla by 40% and its fishing volume by 55%. Today, catches are more modest, yet they still cover the needs of the city's restaurants and markets. Even if fish remains the basic ingredient of the local cuisine, it seems that more reasonable and small-scale fishing has returned, since the Portuguese use more and more imported products. Prior to leaving Tavira, one last look at the salt marshes that produce fleur de sel, or top-quality unrefined salt. Harvesting is still done by respecting traditions and requires a lot of patience, since one only delicately gathers the fine crystals that float on the surface. This exceptional condiment will be dried for 24 hours prior to being packed and shipped. A label of origin guarantees the good reputation of the business that is handed down from generation to generation. For the more ordinary salt, the natural evaporation technique is used for the harvest that usually takes place at the end of September. Our journey ends here, on these ancestral coasts that witnessed the departure of the greatest explorers and now offer the visitor a peaceful stopover. It is a land with a rich culture and beautiful landscapes, with its contrasts and a gentle way of life, that despite his desires for faraway lands, Henry the Navigator would not disown today.